Thank you for joining for this episode of the TechSpective podcast. My guest this week is Astrid Bailey. So, Astrid, if you could, tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, your role, and then we'll have a fun conversation.
Sure. My name is Astrid Bailey. I am a program manager by trade. I've got several programs at Adobe that I help run. My background is actually with a communications and journalism degree, but I've just kind of had an interest in security and picked up projects along the way until today, where I have an actual full-time job in security. At Adobe, I am in security engagement, so I mostly focus on how we can bridge the gap between like leadership expectations and like technical teams and getting everybody to work together really well.
All right. So that's an interesting, we can already like segue off topic. That's my favorite thing to do in a podcast. Interestingly, I find it very interesting that your background, your degree is in journalism and communications, and you ended up in security. My background was in technology and security, and somehow I ended up in journalism and communications.
Yeah. I mean, I think at first it felt like a common degree may have been a waste of money, but the further I get in my career, the more that's coming up as being the most important skill set. So the ability, when I talk to new grads, I'm always like, the ability to write, that's the one you got to get nailed. Like from there, you can add any skill, but if you can't write, you're going to have a really hard time.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's fair. And I think, ultimately I feel like, and without, knowing a whole lot about you, but I feel like coming at it from either direction gives us essentially the same broader skill set, which I have found very advantageous, which is I have the technology background, I have the security background, which makes me a more effective marketing and journalist and communications person because I know what I'm talking about. You're coming at it the other direction where it's like, you're in the security and the technology side, but because you have that background, you can communicate more effectively about it, which very much is an issue. I agree with you completely. Because a lot of times I find as I'm working with organizations that the subject matter experts, the people who know the information that we're trying to convey are often not very good at conveying it. And that's part of the problem organizations have. And so, yeah, if you can, definitely, if you can write and coherently form thoughts on paper, so to speak, is hugely beneficial. So let's talk a little bit more about your role at Adobe specifically. We'll come back off of my segue and get back on topic. I had seen this blog post from Adobe that you wrote, the "What is a Security Champion," and I found it very interesting. And again, this talks to our sort of the reverse parallels of our careers, so to speak. But when I was in the trenches, and when I was at EDS, and I was security analyst, architect, engineer, whatever you want to call it, it changed over time. For a period of time, one of my roles was effectively doing a security audit of a program, before it was delivered to production. Now I'm dating myself some because this is definitely pre DevOps, like we're talking back in the waterfall days. So it was dysfunctional to say the least, because it was a situation where developers were gathering requirements and developing the product, and there was like the cutoff time of, okay, after this date you can no longer give us any more ideas. It is what it is. Now we're going to go spend 6 months developing this product, and at the end of 6 months we're going to release it, and then we'll start all over again and do this again next year. which put me in a very bad situation because security wasn't involved in the requirements phase. Security wasn't involved in the development phase. They were just coming to me at the end and saying, here's this thing we've now spent the last 9 months working on. Can you review it and let us know if it's secure? And inevitably it wasn't. And now my job is to tell them that, hey, that 9 months of work you did was, kind of for nothing, and the thing is not that I ever even did that, because I was not really empowered to do that. I was not empowered to say, hey, your product you spent 9 months on is insecure. You cannot release this to production. Like, I did not have that kind of authority. It was more like I was just making them aware, like, like, oh, by the way, when you release this to production, here's all the problems you're going to face. And it sounds from I just know, as we've gone from waterfall to agile to DevOps, that things got way better. And it sounds, from the way this blog post describes it, like you have a slightly better system than what I had.
Slightly. I used to lead dev teams before I was at Adobe, and I totally understand. You get to the end and you're like, hey, security, give your blessing. And we're definitely looking to resolve that. But one of the constraints you have is, there's a shortage in the IT industry for even people who know security, because security has only picked up speed in the last decade. And you can't go out and hire an engineer for every team. You can't even train a PGM for every team. So that's where our security champions are really helpful, because our product teams have somebody who says, I love security, I wish I was in security, or they just have an opportunity to find somebody and say, have you ever thought about learning more about security? And then we take that person and we help train and guide them and incorporate them into the processes. So they get that leadership opportunity. Like you said, you were an engineer who didn't get to, how to grow into communication skills. So we give them that opportunity to grow into communication skills. They don't have to get a new job, and they get a new subject that they made and turn into their career if it really takes off for them. So it's a great, solves several problems for us. It solves, getting involved in the processes and getting to know the teams well, and it solves staffing issues as well. And, Adobe really prides itself on opportunity for our employees, and so it also solves that.
Okay. I recently, one of the books I finished recently is Inspired by who's the author? Marty Kagan, and it's about product. Like how to build and manage product teams, and I don't know. It's a good book. There's a lot of information in there. But he does talk in there about, that there are some roles where, like, every product team needs to have a dedicated person that, is only focused on this project, this product. But there are other roles where it's like, well, that doesn't make sense. Like, your involvement or your contribution to the team is not a full-time engagement thing. I don't need to have that. I don't need to have a separate full-time employee individual for every single one of these teams. And from the blog post, it sounds like that's kind of the approach you have with the security partners and the security champions at Adobe, is not necessarily like every single project needs to have its own, but like you might be engaged in a couple different projects or whatever as the security champion. Is that accurate?
So there's two roles that you mentioned there. So the security partner is actually in the security organization, and they're not a PGM. They're far more technical than that. They're a former engineer, sometimes even a security champion who became a partner, and they manage a portfolio of products. So they have a couple of our bigger products, a couple smaller, and then their liaison into the product space is a security champion. So a security champion is most likely one-to-one, like as in they wouldn't have multiple projects, but we could have a product that's so small they have one security champion who spends 95% of their time on something else. They give us 2 to 4 hours a week of security work. Or the product could be so big. Some of our products have 30 champions who just represent one component and maybe there's a couple of dev teams sitting underneath that component alone, and they just happen to have enough information of what those different teams do that they can go out and source. Oh no, we need to talk to this person and that person. We need to, get this person sign off, or hey, they're really hard at work on this one initiative. If you want us to switch these around, here's the trade-offs. And then our security partner is educated enough to say, no, you need to switch this and that around. Or if the champion says, we can't do that, the partner can look at their backlog and say, actually, you can. Like, I understand what you're doing. You can't. And it's generally a very positive relationship. But in the event that we need somebody to push back, we have the technical expertise on either side so that they can have a true peer-to-peer conversation versus, being a program manager by trade, I've learned on the fly, but I'm usually the one who collects the questions and then tracks down the resource. In this case, we have somebody who can do both in that meeting.
Okay. So I guess to kind of further clarify that point, as a security champion, would you be involved in multiple projects at a time? And if so, like how many could you, would you feasibly be involved in to like kind of share your time?
That's not necessarily how we would phrase it. So as a security champion, you might have multiple projects on your team just naturally. In your day-to-day job, you may have multiple projects. We wouldn't get into that level. We would, one of your projects may be being a security champion. But as a security champion, we often get big security, our security org will hand down prioritized initiatives. So maybe, let's say for this quarter, there's 5. Then they're helping us prioritize those 5 initiatives. So if you're looking at those initiatives as being projects, then yes, they're involved in multiple projects. Okay. If that's helpful.
Okay. So coming back to the blog post and back to my own experience being the security, sort of roadblock to production. What do you do, and what does Adobe do to make that a more empowering role? To make it something where it's like you just mentioned, like it's a more a more positive experience than that. It's not I'm the bad guy telling you can't release this product. Like how do you empower the security champions?
Sure. So one of the big drivers for us is, like you said, there's 2 ways to do security. There's, hey, I'm security and I'm super important and you're going to do my will. And that only gets you so far. You're going to die on a couple of hills and then your relationship is really in a tough spot with that team. Or there's, hey, the reason we chose the title partner even is we want to communicate, we are your partner, we are your friends, like let's work together and make Adobe successful. And so by having a champion embedded, we're able to say, hey, champion, what's your team's process? We don't, not every team has standard processes at a company as large as Adobe. And so, hey, what's your process? What hierarchy can we put this ticket in? Who do we need to talk to? How are you set up? Because a lot of our products, they were acquisitions and they've been integrated into Adobe, but they may have a different way of doing a process. So we never insist on, you have to do it our way. And then the other thing that we do, we work with our champions to make sure that their managers acknowledge them, that their managers know what they're doing. We have quarterly VP meetings where we'll bring the champion, we'll call out, they were really helpful. They did this and that, and here's how they were successful. We couldn't have done it without them. So they also get that visibility outside of their day job where, now the VP knows their name. Now, other people in security have met them. So there's really good reputation building. We've had security champions build up such a great reputation that, they came over into our org in a leadership position because everyone could see, they did so well in the product space that they'd be a really great subject matter expert so that we could have those better relationships as we learn both perspectives.
Okay. So, one of the things, is that I guess sort of finding the balance, because in the end, like, traditionally, security, years ago, has been the bad guy, the roadblock, that was kind of, how security was viewed. And that has certainly changed over time, just as security has evolved and businesses have evolved. And I think, both as developers and organizations have a greater respect for security and the need for security, but probably more importantly was security, to your point, kind of getting off its soapbox a little bit and recognizing that fundamentally the role of security is to empower the business to do things more securely, not to implement draconian policies that make it impossible to do business. It's like finding that balance. I guess for you personally, I mean, if you can answer for Adobe, that's fine too. But I think it's really more of a personal perspective question. Like, how do you find that balance between providing guidance to a team or, sort of exerting your authority and imposing security? And follow-up side question: are there times that you feel like, like even as you're trying to find that balance and you're trying to work with a team, there are some things that, like, from a security perspective, where it's like, no, that's just an absolute, like, you cannot do that. And so I feel like there are times where, like, you have to exert the authority. Like, if the partnership's not working out, you have to kind of step in and go, okay, but you literally cannot do that.
Right. Sorry, you must encrypt. 100%. I think the big takeaway is communication, right? Like, let's have a conversation. Let's never assume like ill intent. Of course, we want to develop all the features, right? But we can't. There's prioritization. There's understanding the trade-offs, and so we try to build that really positive rapport. Like, hey, can you tell me what's really going on here? Like, say for example, a product goes from being a green great status to, like, we've had to say, you're yellow, you're at risk, you're not doing certain things. Like, we don't, beat them into submission until they turn green again. One of the things that we do is we say, okay, you've got your roadmap. That's great. Obviously, this roadmap, you can't make progress on this because you're having it, you need a dedicated way to get back to being secure. And so we go through and we create either a path to yellow or path to green plans, depending on what their status are. And then that's what we take as, like, let's focus on this for right now. Let's ignore not ignore the roadmap, but here's where we really need to go. And then, do we need to meet weekly with your leadership? Do we need to meet bi-weekly? Are you overwhelmed? Can we work with your leadership and help them understand they really need to put some more headcount here? They really need to invest in this tool. They need to bring on a contractor. And how can we help? And then, as we communicate along the way, we have different, escalation paths outlined. And there does come that point where, we get a couple of VPs in the room, and you bring your leader, we'll bring ours, we'll prep both sides, but really a decision does need to be made. And I haven't seen it escalate to the point where it's contentious. Like, generally there is a path, because we've sent out our monthly reports, we've sent out our VP reports, we've had meetings. We work really hard on having kiss that stick communication. So when we're going to say we need to escalate to a level above a security champion, we show them that communication first and say, hey, read this, give us any feedback. We're going to send this in a week to the next level of leadership. But if you can make any changes in the next week, we're happy to incorporate them. Like, we're not telling on them, and we really, really want to focus on, like, long term, we're all going to be on this team for a long time. So how do we maintain that sense of, like, camaraderie?
Which literally that was where I was going to go next, which is, I think, one of the things that has fundamentally shifted in the, whatever 15 years since I was doing what I was doing, is that camaraderie, is the we're we're all on one team. We're in the same boat. We're rowing in the same direction. You know, it's not you guys are trying to do this thing and now I'm coming in to tell you to stop it. There is, you know, and it does kind of go a little bit back to what I was saying about how the company has a greater respect for security, but security has a greater respect for the business, and all of that is, I think, has evolved some to where the scenario I was describing doesn't really happen that often, or at least it shouldn't. You know, because you are all on the same team and you're trying to accomplish the same thing. And so it shouldn't, you shouldn't necessarily run into situations where someone's like, well, no, we're going to do this. And then as security, you go, well, no, you just can't, because like you pointed out, you're on the same team together. You should just be communicating, and there should be understanding from both sides about, okay, this is the business goal we're trying to achieve, but these are the security requirements we need to do it within.
Yeah, I would say that is true. It has evolved in the last 15 years, but I would say it's true at Adobe because we focused on it. I had a previous company where I had the exact opposite problem, where, you know, the couple of security guys would come wandering out of the back corner and hose your project 6 months in, because that company had not invested in having champions and having awareness and having training. So I think it does speak to Adobe, and I know there are other companies who've done similar programs like our Security Champion program with some tweaks out in the industry. So we're not alone in this, but I do think, you know, it hasn't happened on accident.
Okay, that's fair. One of the things that I was curious about, and you know, right before we kind of kick things off, you had mentioned that, you know, you're gonna, you know, head into the office, you know, for basically the first time. How, you know, obviously a lot has changed in the last you know, two years or whatever, with the pandemic, and we had the lockdown, and now as companies are sort of trying to, you know, I guess navigate between, you know, do we you know, issue some sort of draconian everyone has to come back to the office again, or, you know, I feel like most companies have softened on that and have adopted some sort of a hybrid model of, hey, it'd be nice if you'd come to the office every once in a while. We're not going to force you. But in terms of what you're doing as a product team, as a, you know, trying to develop things, and you as a security champion trying to work with them, how has the pandemic and the remote and hybrid work impacted that, the ability to kind of interact as a team?
Well, it certainly impacted it. So one of the ways that it's impacted it is we as security have had a couple of reorganizations. And so we've taken teams that were traditionally one region, and now we've got team, you know, my team spans 3-4 regions at least. So we do, although we are coming back into the office more and there will be more events like that, we still have to keep hybrid in mind. There are still people who aren't comfortable coming to the office, and we don't want to exclude remote employees. We did a survey about this time last year to our security champions. Hey, what's going on? Do you like this program? Do you like being a security champion? If not, can we help you leave with dignity? And asking questions like that. What do you expect to get from this program? You know, what would be the perks for you? And we did notice a pretty substantial, not decrease in satisfaction, but we did note that those who had joined our program in the last couple of years when everything was remote weren't as satisfied as those who joined the program 5 years ago, because we used to do, you know, an all in person, this before my time at Adobe, but an all in person trainings, you know, they called it a summit. It's basically a mini conference every other year. They did little events here and there, because one of the things our champions really love is they love the ability to network. You know, if they're not going to move into security, where's their next role in product? Oh, I met this person. I heard about their team. I'm really interested. And one of my goals for the FY23 is to reimagine what we do in terms of training and getting together and recognition for our security champions. And some of that will be small things. Like I've sent emails to our security organization. Hey, you gave a presentation at a conference. how would you love to give that presentation internally to our security champions? Low hanging fruit like that. What topic are you interested in? Would you like to share that with a group of people? Because we also find that our security champions are interested in getting more involved in the industry and they want speaking opportunities. So why not use that interest and pair it with the interest in training and say, how about you have some experiences in-house first, and then when you go out into the industry, you can preach to your home team and find out, get some feedback first. So we're looking at things like that. One of the other areas I'm realizing that I'm going to need more help with in FY23 is I need some regional leads. I know our India team is really interested in having some on-site events. Well, I'm not in India, I'm in Utah. And so I'm going to be reaching out to our India team who've expressed interest and saying, great, can I deputize you to throw an event? Can we work together, and then you can do the logistics side of it and do something that's more maybe interesting to the product teams that are based in India. And then we can do one in Utah and look at, okay, what product teams are based in Utah and who's interested, and kind of go about it that way as well.
Okay, makes sense. And I feel like a lot of those things are not they're not unique to product teams or to security champions. I mean, I think those are a lot of that are the things that companies just have to sort of navigate in general for all teams. To try to figure out, I mean, I've had managers who were very fond of what they called the drive-by conversations of, you're in the office, you're just walking, through, and you just, you're walking past someone's desk, and then you're like, oh, wait, let me stop and chat. And those things don't happen as much, when you're not face to face. So yeah, so I think everyone has to navigate that some, but there are also certainly pros and cons to both. For example, I was last week, my friend and I were hiking in Yosemite. So after we were done hiking in Yosemite, we drove down to LAX so I could fly back to Houston, and we made it 280 miles in 4.5 hours, or 4 hours, 280 miles in like 3 or 4 hours. And then took another hour and a half to go the last 40 miles, just on the 405 in LA, like just bumper to bumper, because we hit it right at rush hour. And both of us spent the entire hour and a half just shaking our heads and being like, why do people do this? Like, who wants to do this every day?
Right.
This is insane. So yeah, that even pre-COVID, those were conversations I had even back when I was working at EDS, because I was working primarily remotely. And we had a manager come along that was like, yeah, we want everyone to be in the office. And I was like, yeah, you're asking me to give up, an hour to an hour and a half in, an hour to an hour and a half out, just sitting in my car, wasting time doing nothing, to do basically the same thing I can do at home. It just seems silly. Oh,
so I've been remote for 5 years, mostly. But my company before that had an absolute, you must be in the office all times, always in the office. And I lived in Seattle at the time, so I had an hour commute each way on the bus, which is not a great experience as a female. And so when I quit to go to a company that was going to let me work remote, my whole team over there stopped talking to me and like, you're going to stay home, you're going to turn into this horrible person, you're going to, turn into a hermit, gave me so much crap. No, I actually had the opposite experience. I became a more well-balanced human. I was happier. I had my energy. I never took another mental health day and called in sick to work. Like I haven't in 5 years. And I used every single one I had at that company because it just was grating to go to work and take the bus and commute. And so I'm very happy with the approach to hybrid. And I do find it funny because all the naysayers in the pandemic, they all had to work from home, and most of them realized that I was right to take that job.
Right. I mean, one of my arguments when I was having this debate with this manager was, I was like, you seem to have this assumption, like if I come into the office and I'm sitting in this desk at this desk in this cubicle, that somehow means we're being more productive, and it just doesn't, because Joe in the next cubicle wants to talk about his son's soccer game, and Sally in the cubicle over here wants to talk about, the Emmy Awards from last night. And people are getting up and leaving their desks and taking breaks, and there's still things you just have to do. Like if you have to, pursue some issue with a bank or something, like there are calls you have to make. You have to make doctor's appointments. Like, so even if you're sitting in the cubicle at work, you're still wasting the same time. Like right. I was like, the 8-hour workday boils down to essentially 3 to 4 hours of productivity, whether I'm at home or at the office. It's just that when I'm at home, those breaks are, I get to let the dogs outside and hang out with the dogs for a minute, or I get to throw the laundry in or do the dishes, things that I would still have to do when I got home. But now I'm able to kind of like balance it out and say, hey, you know what? I'm going to take a break for 15 minutes. I'm going to step away from my desk, and I'm going to go do some of the things that need to be done in the house, which is way more valuable to me than, Joe's kid's soccer game. No offense to Joe.
Oh, well, and I think, one of the things that Adobe has done really, really well is as a working remote, I still have had remote volunteering opportunities. So I've still met Adobe employees through, hey, we're going to do mock interviews for this organization, and we're going to help all these at-risk youth, learn interviewing skills. So I've met people through virtual volunteering, or, we've got a Adobe Pet Slack channel. It's definitely the highlight of my day because everybody shares their cute pets and doing funny things. So there's still camaraderie that can be built outside of the office that still gives that sense of belonging and friendship. Or I recently joined our Lehigh Fund Committee. So we are going to try to plan more security events to bring people into the office. But then there's a purpose and there's some fun. It's not just, I walked in, all my managers above me are remote, so I didn't see anybody, but I got in there. I'm trying to make it more valuable. One of my remote teams, so before I was in security, I did technology for corporate conferences and events. So we were 100% remote because no one was based in the same city, sometimes not even the same country. So we worked remote all the time. But then when we got on site, it was like a family reunion, your long lost best friends. And there's nothing like the event industry for that, because you don't get tired of hearing about the soccer game, because all of a sudden you haven't seen this person in 6 months, and it's far more fun to work together and far more productive because you're excited about it versus like, oh crap, this guy again.
Right. All right. Well, so to kind of bring this back a little bit to the topic at hand. There have been a couple things that you've pointed out are, that's not necessarily the way it's, some of the things are just as security and businesses have evolved, and some things are unique to Adobe. Like Adobe has gone out of its way to instill this culture and to promote these values. And you said your last company or whatever didn't necessarily have some of those same values. So those organizations do still exist. If an organization say isn't currently doing some sort of security champions and having this sort of focus for product teams and projects, what advice would you offer? Like what are kind of the I don't know, the foundational pillars that you need to have to try to get this sort of a program going?
Sure. I would start with grassroots. Send out an email and asking, who's interested in learning more about security, and see if you can start just a small group of employees who, maybe they each want to take, I'll take this week and I'll find an interesting article in security, and, I'll come bring it back to the group, and just see if you can get some base level interest, and then start having conversations about, what does your roadmap process look like? What are your development processes? Do you think about security, and start to get some of that process level information out of them. One of the things that we're actually doing to get some of that data even still at Adobe is we've recently launched a CAB, so Customer Advisory Board, but instead of it being external customers, we're we reached out to our product teams and found our most vocal product leaders when it comes to security and said, would you be interested, would you commit to us for 18 months of being in this group where we, we'll bring you together, we'll have a set agenda, we'll bring in security leaders, and we'll have a dialogue outside of reporting structures. And then they're giving us that insight into processes, or, hey, when you wrote, you came out with this initiative and you did it in this way and you impacted us, and it was a broken process, and here's how to fix it. So if you start getting that data, then you can we've taken those data points back to our leaders and said, hey, here's your impact. Here's the data we're getting. Can we get more buy-off into having more of these CAB-like concepts? So if you can we have this group who's interested in security. Here's the things that they're noticing. If we started up a more formal project, we could get insights like this. We could make things better and show them the value. Then you can get your leaders on board and, potentially rolling out a V1 of the Security Champion program. And, we at this point have it on every team, but maybe you say, here's our 2 or 3 teams that we have challenges with. Let's start there. Let's do a beta. We'll pick three teams. We'll time cap it for 3-4 months and see what improvements we can get back. And then if it's going well, roll it out to a couple more teams. Maybe you can't do everybody, but then you look at it and say, man, if these 3 teams or 4 teams had an incident, that would really hurt our reputation. So let's start with the most impactful teams, and then eventually you could get to the spot where everybody is covered by a program.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, and again, I think a lot of it, a lot of what you have said, really ultimately comes back to just communication, just having an ongoing dialogue and treating each other like humans that are part of the same team, and not like, you're kind of swooping in to tell them how to do their job.
Yeah. And it sounds so simple, and yet it is not.
Yeah. All right. Well, I want to thank you for taking the time to join me. I mean, it was a fun conversation, and honestly, as many people as I've talked to and have known across the security industry, I want to say you're the first person that I've ever had the conversation with about sort of like the reversal of the pattern of career. And one slight parallel to what you were just describing, though, is that I was not in security. Like I was doing network admin stuff, and like server admin stuff, and was kind of invited to learn more about security at the time, because they were, they had a project. EDS had a project they were doing with General Motors that was security oriented, but they wanted someone who really understood Windows servers. And so the manager of that team had come to me and said, hey, you do this, and I had just gotten my MCSE, and so he was like, do you want to join the security team? And I was like, all right, sounds like an interesting thing to learn about. And yeah, I mean, that was kind of how that all started. And then I ended up sort of taking on like outside writing things just as like resume fodder initially, just to kind of be like, I just wanted to have something where I could be like, hey, look, I did this thing, and I published this thing, and it makes me look smart. And it all kind of took on a life of its own over time.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I did. I started as a project manager who couldn't write code, but they liked the fact that I could talk and write. And then led a dev team, got them to a point where I was bored, and then just said to my manager, what else is in this department that I could do? And security the company that didn't have a great security culture, so they had 5 whole employees in security. So I just volunteered to start picking up their projects. I made a deal with my manager, as long as I got my day job done, that I could volunteer, no extra comp, just interest. And then I did that at 2 other companies until I had all these little bits on my resume and on LinkedIn, and Adobe saw those. Some random recruiter waltzed across my profile and pinged me. So
yeah. The magic of
works.
LinkedIn.
It is magical, that's for sure.
Yes. All right. Well, thank you very much for taking the time, and enjoy the rest of your week.
You as well.
I appreciate you investing your time to listen to the podcast, but I also invite you to engage on social media. Please go like our Facebook page and follow at TechSpective on Twitter and Instagram. You can feel free to let me know what you like, let me know what you don't like, let me know if you love it, let me know if it sucks, and let me know what products you'd like to see reviewed or what questions you'd like to see answered in future posts.